The downfall of a duke, stripped of every military title given by his mother and no longer known as HRH, the Queen casts out her favourite son. After learning he's likely to face civil trial for sexual assault, Prince Andrew was called to Windsor Castle. In a stark announcement, the Queen made clear he'll face the case as a private citizen, and it's clear too she had family support.
And I'm sure she would have done that with some pressure from Charles and from William and others in the family, I suspect.
It means there is effectively no way back to public life for the Duke, who has always claimed he's innocent. Chris will take us through this latest extraordinary development as the royal family attempts to protect the monarchy. Also on News at 10 tonight. In plain sight, MI5 warns MPs this Chinese woman may be a spy operating in Parliament. Out of sight, the PM pulls out of a trip to Burnley as a debate rages in his party about his future. COVID self-isolation cut from 7 to 5 days in England from Monday, and
Men and women of Britain and the Empire.
An uncanny resemblance and a retake on his role in history. Jeremy Irons on playing Neville Chamberlain for star author Robert Harris.
If he ever wanted a Chamberlain, I was his man.
So needless to say, I said thank you very much.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham.
Good evening. Few decisions could have caused the Queen more pain in her nearly 70 years of duty than the one she took today. She agreed with her son, Prince Andrew, that his royal role is over. He can no longer use the title His Royal Highness in public. His honorary ranks in the armed forces, which meant so much to him, like Colonel of the Grenadier Guards, have been taken away. They'll be redistributed among family members. The Queen acted quickly and decisively after it became clear yesterday Prince Andrew is due to go on trial in a civil case in New York for sexual assault. The removal of his royal status may help distance the institution of the monarchy from the court case as he contests Virginia Giuffre's claims he has always denied. In the words of the two-sentence statement from Buckingham Palace, he now defends that case as a private citizen.
Prince Andrew's car was seen driving back towards his home on the Windsor estate this afternoon, and when an announcement arrived at 5 o'clock this evening, it was clear where he had been. Inside the car, the Prince was in the back seat. He'd seen the Queen, to be told there was no way back into royal life. The Queen took back all the military affiliations she had bestowed on her son with immediate effect. That included the role he had until this afternoon as Colonel of the Grenadier Guards. He will also no longer be able to style himself His Royal Highness because his royal duties are over. In a statement late this afternoon from Buckingham Palace, it was announced, with the Queen's approval and agreement, the Duke of York's military affiliations and royal patronages have been returned to the Queen. The Duke of York will continue not to undertake any public duties and is defending this case as a private citizen. It was a decision not just of the Queen, but of Andrew's family.
She will have done that with some pressure from Charles and from William and others in the family.
And you can almost feel the hand of those who will inherit the throne.
Oh, undoubtedly, it will have been the people who have most invested in the good name of the monarchy. So the heirs. You know, this is too big a. This is not just about family. This is about an age-old institution that has a future, and its future is in the hands of William and Charles.
Prince Andrew will keep military titles that are not in the Queen's gift. For example, he remains a Vice Admiral in the Royal Navy. Andrew had flown in the Navy during the Falklands War, but whatever his past service, many veterans had demanded his royal affiliations were removed.
I think we all wished that he had taken matters into his own hands much earlier on stepped back to clear his name. That would have been the right thing to do. But as the time ticks on, these decisions are taken out of his hands, and that makes his position more and more difficult, and as we've seen now, untenable.
The Prince's legal team had been silent since a judge ruled yesterday that Virginia Giuffre's civil action against him, alleging sexual assault, could continue. But tonight, a source close to the Duke said, given the robustness with which Judge Kaplan greeted our arguments, we are unsurprised by the ruling. However, it was not a judgment on the merits of Miss Giuffre's allegations. This is a marathon, not a sprint, and the Duke will continue to defend himself against these claims. Prince Andrew's family knew how damaging this was for him. They acted to protect the reputation of the monarchy.
And Chris is here. An incredibly clear-cut moment of decision for Her Majesty the Queen. I mean, pretty comprehensive too. How shocked were you to hear it?
You know, Julie, I remember being outside Buckingham Palace where in 2019, when after the Newsnight interview, they announced that the Prince was stepping back temporarily. That was a big moment. It felt unprecedented. This, let's be clear, is bigger because it's permanent. And when the palace were telling us tonight that they are redistributing his affiliations and his patronages among other members of the royal family, they said this: they will not return to the Duke of York. And you can kind of finish that sentence, not ever. And I think that is the sort of clear-cut decision that was made by the Queen today. And let's face it, it can't have been an easy decision. You've got the son here denying the allegations that's been made against him by Virginia Giuffre, but the Queen telling him this had to happen.
And the context is key too, isn't it? This is the Platinum Jubilee year. All eyes, not just on the family, as Penny Junor was pointing out in your report there, but on the institution itself.
Yes, I mean, a lot's been said about the Jubilee year, a moment, by the way, we reach in just a few weeks' time on Accession Day on February the 6th. But whatever way you look at it, this is going to hang over the royal family, because if this goes on, if there is no settlement, if it goes on its way towards a trial, of course we're going to cover it. He is still the Queen's son. But I think putting some distance, which he now has, I mean, the calls for him to be stripped of these military titles were not going to go away. The Queen could see that. Prince Charles could see that. Prince William could see that, and that's why, as a family, they've decided this was the decision they had to make.
OK, Chris, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, as if tension hasn't been high enough in Westminster politics this week, MI5, no less, has alerted MPs to beware of a spy trap. The security service says it's been keeping tabs on a Chinese lawyer in London with past links to the embassy here and the Communist Party back in Beijing. Her name is Christine Lee, or at least that's the one she's known by. MI5 believes she's trying to interfere with British democracy. Over the years, she's met politicians from all sides. Most recently, she's said to have donated thousands of pounds to a Labour MP who had her son working in his office until today.
She is an alleged agent of China's Communist Party, close to power not just over there, but over here too. She posed at parties with politicians in power and those who wanted to be in power. But investigators believe there was a sinister motive behind this shoulder rubbing. This was the rare and urgent warning sent to MPs today from the security service MI5, and some of the recipients will have known the name Christine Lee and recognised the face, though they might not have known the allegation that she knowingly engaged in political interference.
In the future, we'll see more alerts of this nature, because of the level of intelligence and security work and the way our system is geared to spot this type of hostile activity.
By trade, Christine Lee is a solicitor. She was the former chief legal advisor to the Chinese embassy in London, but in 2006 she founded the British-Chinese Project and became a familiar face in Westminster. She reportedly had a good relationship with David Cameron and was given an award for her work by Theresa May. And she donated more than £400,000 to the Labour MP Barry Gardiner, and he wasn't the only one. Tonight he defended himself, saying he did all the proper checks on the donor he came to regard as a friend.
She never asked for anything. What she may have sought is to be in a position of friendship with somebody who might at some stage have influence. That is certainly what the reports from the security services and the Speaker would imply, that she sought to have that relationship where at some stage it might become material.
And Christine Lee's son worked in Barry Gardner's office. Today he quit his job. The allegation here is not of espionage, of trying to steal state secrets. It's about interference, attempting to influence the democratic process. And what many people in the intelligence world say is that they don't have the tools, the laws that they need in order to deal with this problem. It means that although Christine Lee is in the UK, there is little expectation that she will face prosecution.
Well, Rohit is here, and we'll speak very shortly to Debbie in Beijing tonight too. First to you, Rohit. I mean, last year it was the head of MI6 that said China had become the single biggest priority for the first time in the history of the agency. This warning from MI5 seems to underline that.
That's right, and today's significant for many reasons, partly because of this change of tone. That reference from the MI6 boss you mentioned, really showed the way that the references to China publicly have been ticking up. A couple of years ago, several suspected Chinese spies were quietly expelled. However, today, here we have big headlines. MI5 put this in the public domain, knowing that this would make news, surely. We never quite know what the breakdown of resources and activity is among the intelligence agencies. I suspect that as the threat from groups like ISIS is perceived to be shrinking, the work that's being done on so-called hostile states like China, Russia, Iran is growing. The difference between China and those others, however, is the scale of their resources and the tools which they can use to affect them.
OK, Rohit, for the moment, thank you very much. To turn to Debbie in Beijing tonight. I mean, presumably there's not very precise commentary on this named individual, Debbie, but what are you hearing there tonight?
Well, no official statement from the government yet, Julie, but I expect when we hear from the Foreign Ministry later, this will be met with denial, derision and the threats we've heard in recent weeks and months. We saw that video released by Chinese state media mocking James Pond last week and mocking the British intelligence agencies. And Richard Moore's comments you've just been discussing with Rohit have been described as a smear and nothing more than false intelligence. But what the government can't deny, because they've given it a name, is the Huaren Sanzhong scheme under which Christine Lee was said to be operating. And its purpose is to engage Chinese citizens living abroad to further the interests of the Chinese Communist Party in political circles, gaining influence and intelligence. With Beijing's showcase Winter Olympics now just 3 weeks away, the government here will also be particularly furious about the timing of this MI5 security alert.
OK, Debbie, thank you very much, and Rohit, thank you too. Now, while MI5 keep up the pressure on Christine Lee, London's Metropolitan Police are continuing with what some might call their relaxed approach to investigating whether there was law-breaking at the Downing Street Bring Your Own Booze party. The force said today it would investigate further, but only if the inquiry by the senior civil servant Sue Gray turns up some evidence of a potential criminal offence. If the Prime Minister didn't obey the COVID rules then, he stuck by the letter of the guidance today.
Boris Johnson should have been here today in Burnley visiting a vaccination centre. But he stayed at home after a family member tested positive for COVID, meaning he missed what locals might have said to him.
If I'd had a chance, I probably wouldn't have spoke to him, to be quite honest. Ignored him. He's ignored us.
I don't really have a lot to say to him or about him. I just think he's shocking.
He should have resigned. Absolutely disgraceful behaviour.
Words the Prime Minister did not hear, not because he had to isolate, but because he chose to follow the guidance and reduce his contacts, leaving ministers to come up with new excuses for the May 2020 drinks.
And we must consider, as this goes to an inquiry, and we look into what happened with COVID, whether all those regulations were proportionate or whether it was too hard on people.
Outside the chamber, Jacob Rees-Mogg called Johnson a formidable leader. Do you understand that people defending the Prime Minister makes them more angry?
Look, I do appreciate that. I had a message last night from a friend of mine whose 2-year-old grandchild died and he couldn't go to the funeral. You know, how can you not understand the anger that creates, the sorrow, the bitterness?
But your friend presumably was angry with Boris Johnson.
He had suffered a tragic circumstance.
That anger from constituents was being felt by Tory MPs in Westminster, with a number criticising the PM behind the scenes. But would they speak on the record? Thanks, but I won't, said one. Sorry, not around, said another. I'm not commenting, added a third as a pattern began to emerge. Apologies, I can't. Sorry to say no. Could this one be a maybe? No. After the PM survived day one, those who did speak were rallying around.
He's taken full responsibility, he's apologised, and I think it's right that we now wait for Sue Gray's inquiry to be completed.
It is absolutely unacceptable what happened on the 20th of May. I'm very pleased the Prime Minister has acknowledged that and apologised. Now let's give Sue Gray the space she needs to complete her report.
I think there's a willingness to wait and listen to what the inquiry has to say. It's sort of a holding pattern right now.
There haven't been enough letters from Tory MPs to trigger a confidence vote in Boris Johnson's leadership. But a number who I spoke to today no longer expect him to lead them into the next election. One asked whether there could be a managed exit for the Prime Minister after he's dealt with the Omicron crisis. And there's been lots of chatter about the Chancellor Rishi Sunak in Devon yesterday, and Foreign Secretary Liz Truss holding Brexit talks today, focusing on their jobs and perhaps one other. Anoushka Astana, News at 10.
Well, one of the political consequences of the Prime Minister's being at that party is he's lost the support of many Scottish Conservatives. Their leader, Douglas Ross, called yesterday for Mr Johnson to resign. 26 other Conservative members of the Scottish Parliament followed suit, opening up a split in the party.
As the battle rages within the Conservative Party, the Scottish Conservatives have fired their first shots after their leader in Holyrood yesterday called on Boris Johnson to resign.
I don't think he can continue as leader of the Conservatives.
Now his colleagues in the Scottish Parliament are taking the same stance.
He set out the conditions by which he believed that the Prime Minister should resign. They were clear, they were consistent and they were considered, and ultimately they were correct.
Boris Johnson's support in Scotland has always been shaky. This not the first time his colleagues have sought to keep their distance. But this is not just a row about Boris Johnson's future. It's exposed tensions about how seriously the Conservative Party in Westminster takes the views of people who live here, and potentially plays right into the hands of those who want Scotland to be independent. In an attempt to play down the significance of the Scottish intervention, last night Jacob Rees-Mogg appeared to belittle the Scottish leader.
Douglas Ross has always been quite a lightweight figure.
A slight which the Scottish Conservative leader today brushed off.
So are you a lightweight? Jacob Rees-Mogg, as anyone, is entitled to their opinions. I don't have to agree with them.
The row providing Scotland's First Minister with her own ammunition.
These might be personal insults directed at the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, but actually they say something much deeper about the Westminster establishment's utter contempt for Scotland.
But by disassociating themselves from the Partygate scandal, the Scottish Conservatives may be enhancing their chances.
If they think that their position, their political position, can be strengthened by getting rid of the UK leader, they, in a sense, have every incentive to do so.
And for many voters here, the party revelations only serve to confirm their worst fears about Westminster.
People have better relationships with the government up here and trust them.
I don't think anything that's said here is ever taken into consideration by Boris at all.
And Boris Johnson's opponents may be the only winners from this Conservative divide as he seeks to keep his party and the country united. Hannah Miller, News at 10, Edinburgh.
And Anoushka is here with me now. You practically wore out your fingers with your WhatsApping, I think, today, Anoushka. But it has gone quiet, hasn't it? Is that a good sign or a bad sign for the Prime Minister?
Well, I think there will be some relief that there are not 54 Tory MPs who are ready to write letters of no confidence. But they'll also be realistic about the level of disaffection on the back benches. I mean, you've literally got MPs talking about whether the Prime Minister might be persuaded to step down at some point. And there are more allegations tonight in the Telegraph about boozy parties among staff at Downing Street, not the Prime Minister, the night before Prince Philip's socially distanced funeral. Remember when there was that iconic picture of the Queen on her own? So it all piles pressure onto the Prime Minister. Now, as you said, the Met Police have decided not to investigate at the moment. They say that when there are breaches to COVID rules, that enforcement is a last resort and that they tend not to investigate things from a long time ago. But they might change that if Sue Gray, in her investigation, finds any examples of criminal activity, and that would also change the attitude of MPs as well.
All eyes on that, Anushka. Thank you very much indeed. Well, it could, of course, just be a coincidence of timing, but as the row of the Prime Minister's carefully worded apology refused to die down today, his famously plain-speaking Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Professor, now Sir Jonathan Van Tam, has chosen this moment to step down. He's off to return to academia at Nottingham University's Faculty of Medicine and Health. He'll be remembered by his initials, but JVT also made his name by explaining the worst of news in the best of ways, often by his mastery of metaphor.
This is like, getting to the end of a playoff final. We've had to use our subs off the bench to keep us in the game. This, to me, is like a train journey, and we've just seen the lights come round the bend.
Now, as anyone whose Christmas was ruined by having to isolate will tell you, less than a month ago in England, you had to stay indoors for 10 days with COVID. Then it was dropped to 7. Now the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, has cut it again to 5 full days.
For some, it was a Christmas of COVID chaos as isolation rules saw hospitals struggle to staff wards, pubs and restaurants forced to close, and schools stretched to stay open. Under pressure to do something about it, today the government said this.
Around 2/3 of positive cases are no longer infectious by the end of day 5. After reviewing all of the evidence, we've made the decision to reduce the minimum self-isolation period to 5 full days in England.
So from Monday, if you test positive, your isolation period reduces from 7 days to 5 if you are double jabbed. That's as long as you can provide 2 negative lateral flow tests, one on day 5 and the other at the start of day 6. The move only applies to England for now. In the rest of the UK, isolation remains 7 days and 2 negative tests. In the US, isolation is already 5 days. Are we right to do the same?
I think this is the year where we do transition back to something, normality. Because the lateral flow tests do actually correlate quite well with when you're infectious to others. If you've had a couple of consecutive negative lateral flow tests, you probably are pretty safe to return back to normality.
It's welcomed by those in hospitality. Michael was forced to close his South London pub on the busiest week of the year in December because of staff having to stay at home.
We run a relatively small business with a relatively tight team, so if we all have a full-time employee who has to be off work for 5 days, it still has an impact, but certainly that's better than 10 days.
The government warns COVID is far from over, but says today is a significant step on the road to learning to live with it. Daniel Hewitt, News at 10.
It is, of course, because of COVID that, try as they might, hospitals in England are struggling and failing to cut the number of people waiting for treatment. Almost 6 million people are now on the list, with lives on hold and pain ongoing in many cases. In the second of our Fight on the Frontline reports, we look at how the huge demand for patients is affecting the treatment many end up getting.
Weather world. COVID has never really gone away here. The Royal Bournemouth Hospital is still treating patients, finding beds for those critically ill with the virus.
What do you remember of the last couple of weeks?
Gary is well enough to leave intensive care and be treated on a ward elsewhere.
Is there a bed in the ward?
Not at the moment, unfortunately. Every day we look at the number of beds we have in the hospital. So at the moment he's going to stay with us. OK, and we'll get him out as soon as we can.
Michelle knows, though, that once Gary does leave, another COVID patient like him will likely take his place.
May I ask if you were vaccinated? No. Do you perhaps regret that now, that decision? The problem is, for every COVID patient that ends up here, there are other people who need planned operations that then can't have a bed here. That is why so many of those have been cancelled or postponed. They're waiting here to get onto a ward. 16 hours they've been waiting. Yeah.
Demand in A&E is even greater. Huge numbers of patients are turning up here, then waiting for hours to get onto a ward.
A lot of patients are kind of voting with their feet because there's such long waits for ambulances, so they're walking in with illnesses that they would have otherwise presented via ambulance. We describe it of a bit of as medical Where's Wally, where we're trying to find the sickest patient in a crowded waiting room, because those chest pains and abdominal pains are also being mixed with patients that should really have gone to the GP.
Bruce says they'd never turn anyone away, but once patients are in, it's becoming harder to discharge them.
We've got 7 wards worth of people that shouldn't be in hospital at this very moment.
7 wards worth?
7 wards.
That's 200 people fit to leave but can't because so many care homes are shut.
If you could get those people out, what sort of impact would that have here?
Automatically, if you've got flow in our wards, if you've got empty beds in our wards, that means we can empty our emergency departments, which means we don't have any queuing ambulances, which means those ambulances can go to give care at home.
Or in a shopping centre. The hospital's resorted to turning this department store into a diagnostic clinic where twice as many patients can be seen.
We have to do something. The alternative is just to carry on as we've always carried on. Let the waiting list grow, let patients lose their sight or their health deteriorate.
Doing nothing is not an option for this hospital. Patient care has to continue no matter what. Emily Morgan, News at 10 in Bournemouth. Scenes from the front line with Emily there now. Finally, in many of the histories of the Second World War, the Prime Minister in its early months, of course, Neville Chamberlain, has had a bit of a raw deal, portrayed as weak compared to Sir Winston Churchill, who replaced him. Historians are already revising that theory, but a new film will speed up Mr Chamberlain's rehabilitation. Firstly, because of the star of Munich, The Edge of War, Jeremy Irons, is a brilliant actor, but also because with makeup, his resemblance to Chamberlain is uncanny.
Men and women of Britain and the Empire. As long as war is not begun.
History records him as the man who was fooled by Hitler.
There is always hope.
Now a new film based on a best-selling novel presents a re-evaluation of Neville Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister who was vilified as a symbol of weakness for believing Hitler's word. Oscar winner Jeremy Irons was exactly who writer Robert Harris wanted to portray his Chamberlain.
I wanted whoever played Chamberlain to be a big figure, not just the normal, rather weedy kind of character actor who plays the Chamberlain figure in films about Winston Churchill.
I called him and said that if he ever wanted a Chamberlain, I was his man.
So needless to say, I said thank you very much.
This morning, I had another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler.
The film centres on Neville Chamberlain's attempts to avoid war by signing an agreement with Hitler in 1938.
As the King and Queen and Mr. and Mrs. Chamberlain come out on the balcony, the cheering rises to a climax.
He was celebrated for a time, but a year later, World War II began. The film contends the Prime Minister was a step ahead of Hitler, signing the agreement to buy time for Britain's rearmament. Do you feel like your book and now this film is righting a wrong?
I think it's correcting a false impression, yes.
He didn't have the sort of pugnacious everyman quality of Winston Churchill. But of course, he had been, and I think continued to be, an extraordinary politician. For us to understand where we are politically, it's very good to understand accurately our history.
How far do you think our re-evaluation of history should go? It's very much a topic of our times.
It's a sign of a vibrant, healthy society, I think, that isn't just, treating the past as the kind of gods, never to be disturbed.
Neville Chamberlain's moment as a hero then was brief. Decades on, we are being asked to look again.
And I want him to publicly commit himself to peace.
Nina Nana, News at 10 at the Imperial War Museum.
Story, that is it for tonight from all of us here on the team. Good night, and we'll see you tomorrow.